Very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. Yeah? Okay, so what I'll start off with is I'll start off with a few slides I probably started off previous lectures on, and I want to do that to set the scene and get everyone's minds into the topic of Ballymoon and the time period where it was built. So, as you've probably seen before, Harold Leask wrote the seminal article on Ballymoon Castle. He called it unique among Irish castles in its design. Quite a strange built castle. Many of you will know that already. Its shape and plan is very strange. It's very unique in Ireland. So to set the scene, right around the time Ballymoon was built, so in the 1870s, the MacMurroughs were raiding the Anglo-Norman colonies, including the Liberty of Carlow. So what I mean by the Liberty of Carlow, the Liberty of Carlow was 1/5 of Leinster. It was bigger than County Carlow is today, so it took in portions of Wicklow, Kildare and Wexford. So in 1279, Roger Bigot, who was in control of the Liberty of Carlow, came to visit these lands, and he met with the MacMurroughs to come to terms with them, basically to try to stop them from raiding his territories. So around that time, he established a manor at Fenagh, and there was a levy put on the entire county to strengthen the castle there. It is also recorded that the master mason, Ralph Guon, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, travelled from London to inspect the works at Fenagh. There's also a manor established at Dunleckney. That was the Crew family. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the old church in Dunleckney, but behind that, there's quite a large mound, and that was the mound. And there's a recorded deserted medieval village associated with that mound as well. So that was the Crew family. And then very important, I guess, for the story here, Bigot, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in effect, in England. He was second in command to Edward I, who was Longshanks. A lot of you remember him from Braveheart. So he led a revolt against Edward I on behalf of the barons. So needless to say, Edward I wasn't very pleased with this. So he took away all these titles and these lands. But then in 1302, Bigot agreed to get back the control of his lands to pass the entire state to the crown upon his death. So Bigot actually dies 4 years later, and Ballymoon is now under the direct control of the crown. And within a year, Edward I also dies. So the lands of Ballymoon and the Liberty of Carlow are a little bit in limbo for a few years. And then Thomas of Brotherton becomes the Earl of Norfolk with the Liberty of Carlow. So he takes it over in 1312. And then we enter properly into the 14th century. The 14th century was a particularly bad century in Ireland and in Europe. We had the Bruce invasions. Again, Braveheart referenced the Bruce family in Scotland. One of them came over with 3,000 or 4,000 soldiers, and for 2 or 3 years they went around the country causing havoc, burning villages and towns and attacking anything that moved, essentially. So that went on. And then there was the European the Great Famine in Europe as well. The 100 Years' War started between England and France in 1337. And then in 1338, Margaret, who's the daughter of Thomas, becomes the Duchess of Norfolk. So she takes over. So she officially owns the Ballymoon and the lands around it. And then the bubonic plague comes in 1346. They think it might have killed up to 1/3 of the population of Europe. And so what all of that meant leading up to this time is that what we refer to as the Gaelic resurgence. So between the Anglo-Norman landings in 1269 up until the early to mid 14th century, the Anglo-Normans were expanding their control in Ireland. And after that, they were retracting. So the Gaelic Irish were taking back their lands, but not necessarily their titles. So that's what was going on from that period. So this is just to set the scene. So when we're talking about Ballymoon Castle, we think was built around 1300, and around that time, maybe 10 years either side of it. So this is all in lead up to when it was built and the first kind of 50 years of its existence. Okay, so what we decided to do then was to try and investigate what was around Ballymoon. Was that we did an initial geophysical survey. The Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society funded this. It was a limited survey, but we got the field of the castle and a little bit north of the castle surveyed. So you can probably see, this is what I'm talking about here. So the grayscale geophysical results are here. So what you get is the lighter color is no reaction and the darker color is a reaction. And what I mean by a reaction is that somebody dug something there. So you can clearly see laneways going around here and down this way, and you can clearly see a square behind the castle, and you can also see this here as well. So, and there's lots of busy geophysical results as well in the field between the castle and the road. So this now is the full results of the geophysical survey, the magnetometry survey we got done. So about a year later, after doing the first initial survey, we applied to the Community Monuments Fund of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and they gave us funding to complete the survey. So I guess what you can see there is that around the castle itself is extremely busy. So the colouring is the geophysicist interpretation of the strength of those reactions. So the dark blue are what he considers definitely archaeology, light blue probably, and then less so down to green and orange. And you can probably see the green lines there, which are probably, cultivation furrows. So with all that done, we could clearly see a defined area around the castle itself. So the field to the west of the castle, so we're talking about over on this side, am I saying that correctly? Sorry, the east. There's basically nothing there, which was a surprise to all of us. There's you see those grey dots, they're just ferrous reactions. So they could be modern bits of like barbed wire or screws or nails or whatever. That's all that was. And then north of the castle field and just a little bit above that, you'd see that there is some reaction there, but there's not much going on there. So there's very, very much a defined area around the castle. Okay, so this is a little kind of focus in on that area around the castle. So what you can probably see here, first of all, just to mention that this here is an enclosure that we didn't know about before. It's probably prehistoric and probably dates to at least 1,000 years before the castle. Just to mention that, but we'll leave that out for now. And then you see the dark blue structure around the castle, or this in the field here around the castle, the dark blue and the light blue. So I guess for me, when I looked at this, I thought to myself, this is very complicated. There's something very strange going on here. I've seen lots and lots of geophysical survey results, and they don't look like this. They're generally, there's little bits and pieces going on, but nothing like this. So I suppose, we were wondering what does all of this in essence mean? And because of that, the geophysicists recommended us to do a different type of survey, so an EMI survey. So we got kind of finer results. But again, you can see that a lot of the same features are coming up. You can see that the trackway from the south leading up towards the entrance of the castle itself, and then over this end over here, you can see like there's probably a trackway leading here as well, and he marked these two yellow as probably buildings, but again, extremely busy and quite confusing. So what I mean by that is that this is normally what you're talking about when you're talking about a medieval village. You're talking about clear routeway, clear house plots, and then behind them, gardens with cultivation furrows. That's typically what one would expect when they're looking at a medieval village. Okay, so that's the full picture of it. Now, I put this up to show also the map here on the right is the earliest Ordnance Survey map that was done in the 1830s. And I guess what struck me was the layout of the fields and how closely they resemble this here, like this. You can see it's exactly the same shape. So that, I suppose that led for a question for me, is this a village? Is this a medieval village around the castle? And is it defined by the field, what was left in field systems up to the 1830s? Okay, so just to go over, there is a significant gap in the record between about the 1350s up to about the 1550s, 1560s in anything we know in written record about Ballymoon itself. But it comes back into the picture in the 1560s when Peter Carew, and I mentioned the Carews earlier, Dunleckney, so they actually left Dunleckney and Ireland in the 1300s. But then Peter Carew the Elder, as he's called, because he had a nephew who took over. Peter Carew the Younger is below him there. He came back and he petitioned a court in Dublin that he had some dubious claim to take back over his lands in Carlow, and he won against the MacMurrough Kavanaghs. So now he takes over and he owns Ballymoon Castle and the lands around it. When he dies in 1575, Peter Carew the Younger takes over, but he dies in 1580, and then George Carew takes over after him. But then enter the Bagnalls. The Bagnalls come into the story then in 1585. So a Nicholas Bagnall bought the lands around Ballymoon, but much larger than Ballymoon itself, around mid Carlow, for his son Dudley. But his son Dudley predeceases him, and then it passes to Nicholas Bagnall, and then to a George Bagnall, and that George Bagnall built Dunleckney Manor. The first Dunleckney Manor, I should say, not the one we see today. And this is a reference in the record I also found. So in 1612, George Bagnall of Ballymoon or Ballymone was granted the entire barony of Odrone, with all its hereditaments called or known by the same Idrone, the manor, castle, town, and lands of Ballymone. The manor, castle, and town. Okay, so we have all this, right? We've done probably as much as we can do looking at the records and looking at the mapping and looking at geophysical survey results and everything like that. So then we decide our next move has to be to do some physical investigations. Because I think, until you actually find some physical evidence of the archaeology, it is tentative. It is, I wouldn't say speculation, but it's tentative. So the research questions we had is, can we confirm that there was a medieval village here around Ballymoon? Was there more than one iteration of medieval settlement associated with Ballymoon? Or was there another function associated with the geophysical anomalies around Ballymoon, like designed landscape, which is mentioned by some of the scholars, the medieval Irish castle scholars? And did the Carews, MacMurroughs, or Bagnalls inhabit the castle and its surrounds, continue set up or alter the layout and function of the castle surrounds? And really importantly, can we date this activity? Okay, so to achieve this, then what we did was we decided to put in 3 trenches following the grant of funding from the Royal Irish Academy. The first trench we put here in the northern field, as you can see, not the field of the castle, the field above that. There's a few reasons we did that. One of the reasons we did that was because we wanted to get the northern extent or a boundary sense of the village itself. We did it there because the geophysics and the results that we got were less busy than anywhere else. So we thought we'd get something a bit more coherent, something a bit easier to understand, and something not either disturbing something earlier or disturbed by something later. So that's why we put the first trench in there. I put the 2 little figures above that in to show you the one I mentioned earlier, with the field system resembling exactly like the geophysics. And then within 20, 30 years that was gone, and a field boundary that we see today was put in. So then we also, as I said, there was 3 trenches. So we put in trench 2 and trench 3 in the field, basically between the castle and the road. Trench 2 was focused in on one of those buildings I mentioned earlier. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's just up here. So it was to capture one of the buildings that we recognize from the geophysics, and its boundary ditch. And there was other boundary ditches here as well. So that's what we were looking for in trench 1. We wanted to find habitation. We wanted to find evidence that there was buildings here and be able to show that, and find domestic artifacts along with it. So that's the primary reason we put that in. And then trench 3, we put in down here, a bit closer down. This is if you're familiar with, this is the gate on the road, the wonky little bridge and the gate. So this is, we felt was a trackway leading down to this, in this direction. So we put that there to show, first of all, to prove that there is a trackway there, but also show that the activity is going down that far south, and to hopefully to date it and associate it with medieval activity at Ballymoon Castle. So that's why we chose those. They're the 3 trenches. Okay, so the detail of the results. So in trench 1, what we were looking for in trench 1, as I mentioned, was a boundary ditch. So we did indeed find a boundary ditch. You can see in the top right picture, it was maybe 80, 90 centimetres deep. It continued, unfortunately, beyond the limit of our trench, but it was over a metre wide at least, a metre and a half wide. So that was the boundary ditch. We showed it was there. But then we also have, you can see the depth of here as well. So this is the bank. So this would be, a lot of this would be the material that they dug and they threw up and they gathered as well to build a big bank, beside the ditch itself, so that anyone who's you're familiar with ring forts and whatever, you have your ditch and your bank. So that's what they did there. And over time, it's obviously spread. So it was what we see today was about 80 centimetres high, but spread over several metres wide, because it would have denuded and spread out. So we did find the bank and ditch there, so we were delighted with that. We also found, curiously, on one of the last days we were on site, we did find cultivation furrows under the bank material. So that definitely suggests to me that the use of that particular area changed. So they were obviously using, and then they decided, to plant crops, and then they decided they needed a defensive bank and ditch there. So like 2 phases of activity. So then there are various bank and ditch fills as you go up along here in time. So like the earliest, these, just to mention that these stratigraphic figures, the triangles are cut features, like cut into the ground. These are deposits. And so the earliest thing goes at the bottom, and so you go up in time back up to the present. So in trench 2, what we found was the earliest feature we found was a very large, wide ditch that water filled quite quickly. This was the kind of at the end of the trench nearest towards the castle. So that was the earliest we found. And then what we believe happened was, we believe a deliberate deposit was put in, and that was used to level the ground and create a surface area. We radiocarbon dated this. We got seeds out of it that we could radiocarbon date, and the radiocarbon date, often they're given in wide spreads, but the statistical evidence suggests that this material dates to between 1550 and 1600. That's what this material dates to. So that's when that activity happened. And just beside this, we have found a curving ditch or trench curving around like this. So we have our large linear going this way, and then a trench going around with a lot of large stones. It wasn't clear that it was definitely like the foundation trench of a wall, but there was a lot of large stone in it, and it seemed to look like that. And then inside of this, we found a large pit, and that was filled initially with silt, but then there was a deliberate deposit of clay put in, quite a deep deposit of clay put in on top of that. And then we found the first evidence of burning, and fire-reddened clay and burning again. So we got this layer of burning radiocarbon dated, and we got a very similar date to here. Again, the second half of the 16th century, or maybe around 1560, 1570, 1580. So with all of these relationships here, what we think we found in Trench 2 was a boundary ditch that predated, a large, long boundary ditch that predated the activity that we're talking about here now, the foundation trench of a building, and a hearth inside that building. Unfortunately, we didn't catch all the hearth itself, and we only got a small bit of the linear, but that's the nature of digging small trenches. And then in Trench 3, as I mentioned, what we were trying to find was a trackway. We were trying to prove that there was a trackway. It was quite far away from the castle, and it also suggested that the village was spread out over a large area, so it was a large enough village. What we did find was we found a somewhat rough stone deposit that did suggest it was a trackway, but would have needed sand and gravel over it to level it off. But it was 3 to 4 meters wide. Either side of it was flanked by little linear ditches or drainage ditches. So we were, I guess, delighted to show that it very much looked like there was a route or trackway there. A little bit on the rough side, I have to say, but still, in all, there was a lot of stone put in at the same level all the way along. We also found that were cut into it, or later than the trackway, we found 2 post holes that didn't align with the trackway. They didn't seem to make sense with the trackway itself. They weren't here and here, or as a boundary or whatever. And we got one of those post holes radiocarbon dated, and the radiocarbon date came in again in the second half of the 16th century. So contemporary with the main activity in Trench 2. And we got a later linear feature dated as well, probably the 1750s or around that time. Okay, so the archaeobotany, or the cereals and legumes and nuts and seeds and so on. So we found quite a lot, actually. There was quite a lot there. There was a lot in Trench 2, and there was a good bit in Trench 3 as well. Most of it was oat, followed by barley and wheats. Oat is typically a stable food, a cheaper food in the medieval period. And it would be probably the most common. If you were at a high status site, you would expect it to be wheat. And we found legumes as well. We found beans, peas, and lentils, and some the collection of wild fruits and nuts as well, as one would expect, like blackberries and hazelnuts and things like that. So yeah, Trench 2 had the highest volume, and then Trench 3 and Trench 1 had very, very little in it. The volume of seeds we found in Trench 2 does suggest domestic activity, habitation, somebody living there. It very much suggested that there was so much of it. Okay, so the metalworking. So in Trench 2, we also found 4 smithing heart cakes. Right, so they're the bottom of the heart. They collect at the bottom of the heart, and they're very diagnostic of blacksmithing. So with there being 4 of them in Trench 2, people aren't bringing these around. They're essentially a waste material, but in metalworking, they're diagnostic in the sense that you can say it's blacksmithing. It's not smelting, or it's actually blacksmithing. So we found 4 of those. So you'll see one here. This is the double one that we found, just to show what they look like. And then animal bone. So we found a small amount of animal bone. Sheep and goat were the most common, and they were followed by horse and cattle. But only 2 bones had displayed butchery marks, which is a little strange, I guess. We would probably have expected to be a little bit more. So the one in the middle, you see there, has a cut into it here. And it's a chop mark into the first vertebrae of, like, the backbone of a horse. Suggesting maybe somebody cut the head off a horse. And also in Trench 2, that layer that I said it was deliberately put in and we got it dated, and it was around in the second half of the 16th century, there was a horse mandible put into it, but was protruding up through it. So we have no idea why they did that. Very strange. So some finds from Ballymoon, just to show you some finds of things that we actually recovered as well. So starting up here, so these are dress accessories. So the first one is a hook and eye dress fastener, dates the 17th to the 19th century. The next one is a copper alloy twisted loop. So that's 16th to 17th century. So again, the more or less the same dates as we're talking about. Then there was an iron shank, possibly a pin. This is a very small iron knife. We found that on the very last day. Almost the last 2 minutes we're on the site. Jamie, remember that? We were quite surprised. It just popped out of the side of the trench. And probably one of the most interesting finds was this one here. This one was found in Trench 2 in a pit beside that heart feature I mentioned. It's actually a barrel lock key from the 12th to the 14th century. So this was the only definite artifact or evidence we got that dated contemporary with the construction of the castle itself. And the pit it was in,
What did you say it was?
it's a barrel lock key.
A barrel.
Lock key, yeah. I wasn't familiar with them either, so yeah. So that's what that was. Very interesting. So on the right, then you'll see on the top left of the right, you'll see that that's an iron wedge. So we found that in Trench 2 as well. The specialist who looked at it said it got a lot of punishment. You can probably see it's quite beaten out of shape there. That's used for woodworking or stoneworking. We also interestingly found a lead window lining. So you see that in the top right. So obviously suggests there's houses there with glass, the lead lining of it, taken out and discarded. We found a structural ring then, that 10312 that you see there, bottom left, and then bottom right, you see a structural attachment dating to the 16th century. Okay, so in summary, in Trench 1, we had a large linear ditch, a large ditch covered with internal bank, and possible furrow marks underneath the bank, suggesting earlier date. The bank and ditch served to enclose the northern end of any settlement at Ballymoon. Essentially what we were looking to prove that this was a northern enclosing element for the village. And unfortunately, we didn't, the layers, I was mentioned there, the layers were quite sterile. We didn't get anything out for dating, unfortunately. But the physical ditch and bank were there. So in Trench 2, we found a large linear ditch based on the geophysics that may run for more than 80 metres across the front of the site, or the front of the castle and parallel to it. We think that would predate the activity of the dating activity we found. This large linear was backfilled and a platform created in the same event, and then a curvilinear ditch that I mentioned was uncovered with a lot of medium and large stones, so possibly a foundation trench, and then a pit was dug that contained heat-affected clay. So over this, this was a heart, and then the archaeological layers contained significant amounts of charred grains and seeds, and then as I mentioned, the smithing heart cakes. So in Trench 3, we had the uneven stone surface constructed with shallow parallel drainage features on either side. And 2 post holes were cut into that and dated the second half of the 16th century, telling us that the rootway predated the second half of the 16th century. And then similar to Trench 2, there were a large variety of charred grains and seeds, and medium-sized linear was uncovered. So what have we learned? In each trench, there were 2 or more phases of activity there were 2 or more phases of activity in all 3 trenches. The majority of the datable activity dates the period around 1550 to 1620 AD. And then we have an enclosed area, a trackway, and a building with an internal heart. So this showed significant activity was shown over a large area around Ballymoon Castle, and the activity strongly suggests a village or manor settlement 250 to 300 years after the construction of the castle. I guess for me, what's really important about all of this, is that, it's very much spoken about in relation to Ballymoon Castle that it was built, it was abandoned, and it was left sitting idle in the field, up to the present period. And that seems quite of a strange interpretation of such a big, large, 20 foot wide, 6 foot or high, 6 foot wide walls with fireplaces and latrines and arrow loops. We think back to that period in Carlow, like what is left, what was built at that time, and what is left of that. You have Carlow Castle, you have Ballyloughlin, and you have Clonmore. There essentially isn't anything else in the county that's left from that period. Nothing else was built that stood the test of time, I mean. So these are large, impressive, this is a large, impressive structure that existed. And controlling Ballymoon Castle would have meant that you control the area around Ballymoon Castle. And so what I was trying to get at, a lot of the debate is around who built the castle, and that then it was left there. But I think it was probably Roger Bigot probably built the castle. He died, and that the McMurrough cabinets took it over. We know that they definitely had it in the mid 1600s, because that's when the crews came back and petitioned the court. We have evidence of that. They petitioned the court in Dublin to get it back from the MacMurrough Cavanaughs. And then in 1612, it's spoken about in relation to there being a manor village. So we know that that happened as well. So I guess we now have physical evidence that there was a settlement at Ballymoon Castle, and that the settlement probably ended when the Bagnalls built the first built the first Dunleckney Manor, and they left there. And there are records of Bagnalls living at Ballymoon, the first two Bagnalls, and that they moved there. They think that the first Dunleckney Manor was finished in about 1625. So that's when we think the castle probably was abandoned at that time. A lot of things changed in Ireland at that time as well. We had the cannon come into Ireland. Anyone familiar with like maybe Ratnageary Castle, you can see that it was destroyed by cannon, by Cromwell. And there was a lot more focus on kind of luxury as opposed to defence. So that's why castles like Ballymoon were left, and manors, comfortable manors were built like Dunleckney. Okay, so in thanks, I'd like first of all to thank the Royal Irish Academy. They funded the excavation itself. It was great to get that. Carlow County Council supported. They also provided funding. Carlow Archaeological Society were important along the way. They were the first funders of the first geophysical survey, and they've given me a lot of support along the way. Carlow Museum and Library, the Community Monuments Fund, who funded the second survey. John Nichols of Target Archaeological Geophysics, he did all the geophysics for us and advised what we should and shouldn't do and how to approach it. And Blake and Bailey did the video productions. I don't know, maybe some of you are aware with the dig diaries that were done around that time. So they did those, they were great. The excavation team. And then I'd also like to mention Paul Shiel and his family of Ballymoon Castle, who own the lands, and the support I've gotten from them. They're very supportive, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you very much.